You shouldn't have seen that. Serena's voice was barely a whisper. Then she pushed me. The next thing I knew, freezing water closed over my head. When I finally broke the surface, coughing, every guest at the garden party was staring. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at the man standing at the edge of the lake. Rafael DeLuca, the Mafia boss. Serena's fiancé. My employer. His eyes weren't on me. They were fixed on Serena, cold as the water sliding down my spine. And when he finally spoke, the entire garden went silent. Tell me why my fiancé just tried to silence my most honest employee. If you were me, would you have trusted a man like Rafael in that moment, or would you have run? Tell me in the comments, because what I did next changed my whole life. My name is Liana Hartley. I'm 25, and for 2 years I was the event coordinator at the DeLuca estate. 100 guarded acres of gardens, stone terraces, and security cameras outside the city. People think working for a mafia boss means seeing bodies in the rose bushes. The truth was quieter. I booked string quartets, argued with florists, and made sure 200 dangerous people drank chilled wine instead of making threats. I liked the work. There is a particular satisfaction in running a day so smoothly that no one notices you exist, and the DeLuca estate demanded my best. 3 kitchens, 40 staff, deliveries timed to the minute, and a guest list where a seating error could start a war. I learned to read a room the way sailors read weather, and I learned which doors in that house stayed closed for a reason. Rafael DeLuca was 35, built like a rumor you didn't want to test, with dark eyes that noticed everything. He ran the legitimate half of his empire from that estate, hotels, shipping, vineyards, and everyone knew the other half existed in whispers. Guests lowered their voices when he entered a room. Staff found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. In 2 years, I watched grown men rehearse greetings before approaching him. I was the exception, and not because I was brave, because of a promise. My mother raised me alone on a nurse's salary, and before she passed, she made me swear one thing: never lie to survive. It costs more in the end, so I didn't lie. Not to landlords, not to bosses, and not to Rafael DeLuca, no matter how much the truth might sting. He learned that about me 3 months after I was hired. His old event manager had been quietly inflating invoices from a vendor owned by Rafael's cousin. Everyone knew. Everyone stayed silent. I didn't. I walked into his office with 2 years of billing records and laid them on his desk. "Your cousin is stealing from you," I said. "Fire me if you want, but the numbers don't care." Rafael studied me for a long moment, then flipped through the records himself. The cousin was gone by Friday. I kept expecting to follow him out the door. Instead, Rafael started doing something no one else at the estate did. When he wanted the truth about anything, a leaking budget, a disloyal manager, a guest list with a problem buried in it, he asked me, not his lawyers, not his captains, me. It became a quiet joke among the staff. If you wanted to know what Rafael really thought, you asked Liana what she had told him. I priced a florist out of a contract for swapping wilted stock into centerpieces. I told Rafael his own mother's birthday seating plan would start a feud, and I was right. Honesty was the only currency I had, and in that house it bought something rarer than money. It bought his attention. That history is the only reason I survived what happened at the garden party. Remember it, because when Serena told her version of that afternoon, Rafael already knew which of us never lied. The party itself was Serena's idea. A late June engagement celebration, 300 guests, white tents, champagne towers, and an orchestra by the water. I had planned every inch of it for 6 weeks. Ironic, isn't it? Building the stage for your own drowning. I had walked the lake path a dozen times that week, marking where the quartet would sit, where the servers would turn, where the lanterns would hang. Serena changed the flowers twice and the menu 3 times, and each time I smiled and rebuilt the plan. That was the job. What I did not see, what none of us saw, was that every change she made pulled staff away from the east side of the estate. Serena Voss was beautiful the way lightning is beautiful, striking, electric, and best admired from a distance. She had arrived in Rafael's life 8 months earlier at a charity gala, and suddenly she was everywhere, on his arm at dinners, picking out china patterns, correcting my seating charts with a smile that never reached her eyes. The staff disliked her. I stayed professional. That was my job. But in the weeks before the party, Small things began to bother me. Serena kept asking questions that had nothing to do with flowers or menus. Which doors stayed open during large events? Where the security office sat? How many guards worked the East Wing after midnight? I chalked it up to a fiancé's nerves. A woman marrying Rafael DeLuca had every right to worry about security. I was wrong about why. There was the afternoon she asked me which camera covered the delivery gate, and laughed it off as curiosity about her wedding gifts arriving. There was the evening I found her on the office floor after a dinner, claiming she had gotten lost looking for a bathroom that was 40 feet the other way. Each incident was small enough to excuse. Strung together, they were a necklace I did not know I was wearing until it tightened. The afternoon of the party was flawless at first. June sunlight poured over the lawns. Guests drifted between the tents in linen and silk. I moved through it all with my clipboard and earpiece, adjusting a microphone here, calming a chef there, invisible in my simple navy dress, exactly how an event coordinator is supposed to be. Around 4 o'clock, everything changed, though I didn't know it yet. I had gone to the service corridor behind the east terrace to find the missing cases of sparkling water. The corridor connected the catering staging area to a stone path that curved behind the boathouse, out of sight of the main lawn. That is where I saw Serena. She was not alone. A man stood with her, someone I didn't recognize, wearing a catering company's windbreaker over clothes that were far too expensive for catering. They stood close, speaking fast and low. I should have announced myself. Instead, I froze behind the hedge at the corner of the path, because Serena had just pulled something from her clutch. A slim black card, the kind the estate used for restricted doors. I knew the design. I carried a general staff version in my own badge holder. She pressed it into the man's palm and closed his fingers around it. "Midnight access, East Wing," the man said, just loud enough for me to catch. "You sure it's clean?" Serena's answer was a murmur, but her smile wasn't. Then she touched his cheek like a promise, and he slipped away down the path toward the delivery gate. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. I stepped back, meaning to retreat quietly. My heel caught a loose stone. Serena's head snapped up. Our eyes met across 10 feet of manicured lawn. For one frozen second, neither of us moved. Then her expression rearranged itself into something bright and social, and she walked toward me, heels whispering over the flagstones. "Liana," she said sweetly. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere. Walk with me to the lake, would you? I want to check the orchestra's position." Every instinct I owned told me to refuse, but she was the boss's fiancée, and I was staff, and 300 guests were a shout away. So I walked beside her along the water, while my mind raced through what I had seen and what it could possibly mean. The lake stretched dark and still beside us, 50 yards across, the far end screened by willows. The orchestra played on, oblivious. At the widest point of the bank, Serena stopped. She turned to face me, and the society smile was gone. What replaced it was so calm it terrified me. "You should be more careful where you wander during parties," she said. "Staff who see things they shouldn't tend to have accidents." My mouth went dry. "Serena, whatever you think I saw," I began. She stepped closer. "You shouldn't have seen that." Then both her palms hit my shoulders, hard, and the world flipped. Sky, hedge, sunlight, then nothing but cold. The lake swallowed me with a sound like a slap. The shock drove the air from my lungs. My dress wrapped around my legs. For a terrifying heartbeat, I couldn't tell which way was up, only the cold and the dark and the pressure in my chest. Then survival took over. I kicked, hard, and clawed toward the light. I broke the surface gasping, hair plastered across my eyes, water streaming into my mouth. The orchestra had stopped mid-note. 300 faces were turned toward me, champagne glasses frozen halfway to lips. Somewhere a woman screamed. I treaded water, blinking lake water from my lashes, and found the bank. Serena stood there with both hands over her mouth, performing horror for the crowd. "She slipped," she cried. "The stone is wet. Someone help her." But no one moved, because Rafael DeLuca was walking toward the lake, and when Rafael moved, the world got out of his way. He had been across the lawn when I fell. He crossed the grass in 10 long strides, guests peeling back from his path like water from a bow. I watched his face as he came, and what I saw there made my shivering stop. He had seen. Somehow, from that distance, he had seen. He reached the bank and looked down at me, treading water in my ruined navy dress, and for one strange second, something almost gentle crossed his face. Then he turned to Serena, and the temperature of the entire afternoon dropped. Serena reached for his arm, her voice trembling beautifully. "Rafael, darling." It was awful. She just lost her footing. I tried to grab her. He looked at her hand on his sleeve until she removed it. "Tell me why my fiancé just tried to silence my most honest employee." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried across the water, across the lawn, into every straining ear at that party. Serena's mouth opened and closed. The guests held their breath, and I floated in the freezing lake, understanding with absolute clarity that my old life had just ended, and something else entirely had begun. Two of Rafael's men pulled me from the water while a server wrapped a tablecloth around my shoulders. The guests were already being ushered toward the house with practiced courtesy, the party dissolving like sugar in rain. I knew those faces. I had spent 2 years arranging their evenings, and now they watched me drip onto Rafael DeLuca's flagstones like an act at a circus. A senator's wife pressed a napkin to her mouth. A shipping magnate's son lifted his phone, thought better of it under Moretti's stare, and lowered it again. Humiliation burned hotter than the June sun. I straightened my spine anyway. Whatever came next, they would not watch me fold. Serena was talking fast, tears arriving on schedule, a flawless performance of a traumatized bride-to-be. Rafael listened to none of it. He watched me wring lake water from my hair, and he waited until she ran out of sentences. Then he said, "Liana, what happened?" I could have lied. Every person on that lawn expected me to lie, to protect the engagement, the party, myself. I looked at Serena, at the warning blazing in her perfect eyes, and I heard my mother's voice one more time. "Never lie to survive." "She pushed me," I said. And 5 minutes before she pushed me, I watched her hand a black security keycard to a man in a catering jacket behind the boathouse. He said the words "Midnight Access" and "East Wing." The silence that followed had texture. Serena's tears stopped as if a valve had closed. Rafael went very still, the way he did in the seconds before people disappeared from his life. "She's hysterical," Serena said, her voice climbing. "She's been overworked. She's clearly jealous. She's been obsessed with you for months. Everyone has noticed." Rafael cut her off with one raised finger. He turned to his head of security, a gray-haired ex-detective named Moretti. "Seal the East Wing. Pull every camera on the service paths." Now, I was taken to a guest room to change, guarded politely, which told me everything about where I stood. Not prisoner. Not free. 20 minutes later, Moretti himself knocked and asked me to come to Rafael's study. The house had gone quiet in the way large houses do when something enormous is happening in the walls. In the study, Rafael stood before a bank of monitors. On one screen, paused in grainy color, was the boathouse path. Serena. The stranger. The black card passing between them, clear as daylight. Moretti replayed it 3 times. On the third pass, he froze the frame where the man's jacket gaped open, revealing a leather shoulder rig worn smooth by use. "Catering companies do not issue those," he said grimly. The stranger's face was half-turned, but Rafael's people were already pulling stills, already running them against every database that answered to the DeLuca name. The machine of that house, once pointed at a target, did not sleep. "There goes her story," I said softly. Rafael didn't answer. He was watching Serena's face on the screen, and whatever he was looking for, he found it, because his jaw tightened once, and then relaxed into something worse than anger. Decision. "The card she used," he said to Moretti, "is the master for the East Wing archive. My office floor. There are 3 of those cards in existence. Mine, yours, and the one in the safe that only 2 people besides me know about." He looked at me. "Tell me everything you heard. Every word," I told him. "Midnight Access. East Wing. You sure it's clean?" The way the stranger had dressed like staff and moved like money. Moretti took notes. When I finished, Rafael did something I didn't expect. He dismissed everyone else from the room, walked around his desk, and handed me a cup of coffee with his own hands. "You should go home," he said, "with protection. This is no longer your problem." "With respect," I said. "It became my problem when she put me in the lake." Whoever that man is, he knows my face now. Hiding won't unsee what I saw. Rafael studied me, and I watched him arrive at the same conclusion. You want in, he said. It wasn't a question. I want to know why I nearly drowned in a lake I lit with floating candles, I said. And you need someone in this house who doesn't lie to you. Right now, I suspect that's a short list. He almost smiled at that. Almost. Moretti will give you controlled access to the investigation. You report to him. You touch nothing alone. He paused at the door as I was leaving and said, quieter. For what it's worth, Liana. I never once thought you slipped. I believed him. That was the moment the ground between us shifted, though neither of us named it. That night, in my small apartment across town, I double-checked my locks for the first time in my life. The next 48 hours turned my world inside out. The stranger on the footage had vanished through the delivery gate into a catering truck with stolen plates. The keycard was real, and worse, the access logs showed it had been used twice already, weeks earlier, in the middle of the night, each time for less than 10 minutes. Someone had been walking through Rafael's most restricted floor like a ghost, and no alarm had ever sounded, because the card was legitimate. The archive held the estate's security architecture. Guard rotations, camera blind spots, panic room locations, the floor plans of every DeLuca property, and the travel routes Rafael used to move between them. I sat in the security office as Moretti laid it out, and my stomach dropped lower with every sentence. This isn't about stealing money, I said. You don't need guard rotations to steal money. This is a map of how to reach him. Moretti's silence confirmed it. Someone wasn't robbing Rafael DeLuca. Someone was measuring him for a coffin. Rafael took the news the way he took everything, silently, standing at the window of his study with the ground spread out below him like a chessboard he had stopped trusting. 20 years, he said at last. I built walls, gates, cameras, loyalties. And someone walked through the front of my house wearing my own fiancée as a key. There was no self-pity in it. Only arithmetic, and underneath the arithmetic, a cold fury I was glad not to be facing. Rafael broke the engagement that evening. I wasn't in the room, but the whole estate felt it, the way you feel a storm through windows. Serena moved to the guest wing of a hotel downtown, under quiet watch, furious and loud about her innocence, her lawyers calling within hours. To the world, it looked like a society rupture. Inside the house, we knew it was a siege. And that was when the second breach happened, and everything got worse. It happened at 2 a.m, 3 days after the party. The wine cellar vault, where Rafael kept documents rather than bottles, was opened with proper credentials. Nothing obvious was taken, but when Moretti's team swept the logs, they found something designed to be found. The credentials belonged to me. My staff badge, my login, my digital signature, used at 2:14 a.m., from a terminal in the East Wing, at a moment when I was provably, verifiably asleep in my apartment across town with 2 of Rafael's men parked outside my building. They brought me in at dawn. Not arrested, never that, but walked into the same study where 3 days earlier Rafael had handed me coffee, and this time the room was full of hard faces. On the desk lay a printout of the access log, and beside it, something worse. An envelope of photographs found in a search of my apartment, photos of Rafael's travel schedules, which I had never seen before in my life, tucked behind a drawer in my own kitchen. Someone had been inside my home. That detail broke something in me that the lake had not. Someone had stood in my kitchen. They had touched my drawers, my mother's photograph on the shelf, the ordinary wreckage of my life, and arranged it into a stage set for my destruction. I felt watched in a way that made my own skin unfamiliar. Whoever they were, they did not just want me blamed. They wanted me erased so thoroughly that even I would doubt myself. Explain, Moretti said, not unkindly. The room waited. I looked at the logs, at the photos, and felt the architecture of the trap around me, elegant, thorough, built by someone who knew how this house judged evidence. Then I looked at Rafael. He was leaning against the mantel, arms crossed, and his face gave nothing away. I didn't do this, I said, and I can prove it wasn't just faked. I can prove who faked it. But I need you to do something first. Moretti actually laughed, one short bark. You need? He repeated, but Rafael raised a hand, and the room settled. Find the truth before you judge her, he said to the room at large, and the order settled over everyone like law. Then to me. What do you need? I took a breath. I need you to look at the timestamp again. 2:14 a.m. And then I need the maintenance log for the East Wing terminals, because I had already seen it. The crack in the frame. Let me tell you what it was. 2 years of running events in that house meant I knew things no security chief ever thinks about. I knew the East Wing terminals had been swapped out 8 months earlier after a flood, and the new ones ran on a network clock that Moretti's own vendor had set 4 minutes fast, because it had never been resynced after daylight saving. Every timestamp from that terminal ran 4 minutes ahead of the rest of the estate. Whoever built my frame had used the terminal's clock to timestamp the breach, and the estate's master clock to schedule it. The two systems disagreed by 4 minutes. Do you think Rafael was protecting me because he trusted me, or because he was already starting to feel something? Tell me your theory in the comments, because at that moment, I genuinely couldn't tell. He crossed the room, read the two logs side by side, and I watched him understand. 4 minutes. The frame had been built by someone inside, someone with access to both systems, someone who knew the house well enough to wear my credentials like a glove, and someone who had just made their first mistake. The frame collapsed quietly, the way good lies do when you pull the right thread. Moretti's team confirmed the clock discrepancy within hours, and the photographs in my apartment turned out to carry a faint trace of expensive cologne on the envelope, a scent I recognized from the estate's corridors, but couldn't yet place. I was cleared, officially, but being cleared and being safe were different countries. Whoever had built that frame knew my address, my badge, my habits. That night I couldn't sleep, and around midnight, a knock came at the staff door of my quarters, because by then Rafael had insisted I move on to the estate. It was Moretti. He wants to see you. Library. The DeLuca library at night was all shadows and lamplight, 2 floors of books smelling of leather and old paper, a fire burning low and a hearth big enough to stand in. Rafael sat in an armchair with 2 glasses and a folder, jacket off, sleeves rolled, looking less like a crime lord, and more like a tired man with too much to think about. I was still shivering, the aftershock of days of adrenaline, and without a word he stood, took his suit jacket from the chair back, and settled it around my shoulders. It was warm from him. I told myself not to notice that. He poured me something amber and sat across from me with the folder between us. "Talk to me," he said. "Not about the case. About you. 2 years you've run my events, and I realize I know exactly 3 things about you. You're honest, you're unflappable, and you take your coffee black enough to strip paint." It was such an ordinary question from such an unordinary man that I laughed, surprising us both. So I told him. About my mother, about the promise. About building a career out of other people's celebrations while never expecting one of my own. He listened the way powerful men rarely do, completely, without checking a phone or glancing at a door. Then, because honesty was my whole religion, I told him the other thing. "Everyone in this house is afraid of you," I said. "But being feared doesn't make you right. It just makes you unchallenged. Serena wasn't your mistake because she lied to you. She was your mistake because no one around you dared to tell you what she was. I would have. You never asked." Most people who spoke to Rafael DeLuca that way got escorted off the property. He went still, and for a moment I thought I had finally found the line. Then he leaned back and laughed, quietly, genuinely, a sound I had never heard from him in 2 years. 2 years, he said, and the only person who tells me the truth about myself is the woman my fiancé threw in the lake. He looked at me over the glass, and something in the room changed temperature. "Don't stop," he said. "It's the only honest hour of my day." He told me things that night he had no strategic reason to tell. That his father had built the empire with muscle and his uncles had died maintaining it. That he kept the legitimate businesses, not as a disguise, but as a promise to himself that the DeLuca name would outlive its origins. That fear was a tool he used because it worked, and hated because it worked. I listened, and understood I was being trusted, and guarded that trust like the keycard itself. We talked until the fire burned down. Somewhere between the second glass and the last ember, suspicion became something else, respect, maybe, or the first rough sketch of it. I want to be clear. Nothing happened that night except conversation. But I walked back to my room wearing his jacket, and he walked me to the door himself, and neither of us mentioned the jacket, and I never gave it back. The investigation, meanwhile, was about to break open, and I was the one who broke it. Cleared of suspicion, I did what I do. I organized. I took everything we knew. The 2 early breaches, the keycard, the vanished stranger, the frame. And I built a timeline on the wall of the security office like an event run sheet, because that was the only language my brain spoke. Moretti humored me for an hour, then stopped humoring and started watching, because the timeline kept doing something his reports hadn't. It kept pointing at the same narrow window of access. Whoever manipulated the records had to be someone who touched both security and scheduling. There were 4 such people. One of them was Moretti. Not me, Moretti said, entirely calm, when I said it aloud. But I admire the nerve. Keep going. So I kept going. The second name was a systems vendor, off-site, ruled out by geography. The third was Rafael's estate operations manager, a soft-spoken man named Dominic Falco, who had run the household for 6 years, coordinated my event staff, approved my vendor lists, and signed off on the East Wing terminal installation 8 months earlier. The same terminals with the 4-minute clock error. The same terminals used to frame me. I sat very still when that connection surfaced. Falco had hired the vendor. Falco had approved the clock setup, or failed to check it. Falco wore a cologne I had smelled every day for 2 years in the service corridors, sandalwood and something sharper, and my memory finally placed it. The envelope of photographs in my kitchen. I told Moretti, and watched him go through the same arithmetic I had, his weathered face hardening. But hard arithmetic isn't proof, and Falco was family adjacent, 6 years of loyal service behind him. Accusing him without certainty would tear the organization apart. Rafael said as much that evening. If we're wrong about him, I lose a loyal man, and the real traitor goes to ground. If we're right, he's already dangerous. He looked at me, and he's already tried to remove you once. That was when Rafael tried to send me away. A house on the coast, a new name if I wanted it. Guards, comfort, distance, all arranged within the hour. He laid it out like a logistics plan, and his voice stayed level the entire time. But I had spent 2 years reading this man's silences, and this silence was afraid. For the first time in your life, I said, you're making a decision with your fear instead of your head. If I'm already part of their target, running won't make me safe. It'll just make me alone. I pushed the folder back across his desk. I don't run from my own story, Rafael. And I'm not done reading it. He came around the desk at that, and for a moment I thought he would simply order it done. Men like Rafael are not accustomed to refusal. You have no idea what these people do to loose ends, he said. Then teach me, I said. Give me the knowledge instead of the exile. We stood there, 2 stubborn people at an impasse, and something in his expression finally gave way. Not to agreement exactly, but to respect. He didn't argue. He just looked at me for a long moment and said, then we finish it together. What he didn't know, what I didn't tell him, because the plan depended on his reaction being real, was that I already had the last piece. Buried in 6 weeks of event logistics was a request Falco had made himself, 3 days before the garden party. Schedule change, moving the East Wing guard rotation to cover my event corridors, leaving the archive approach unpatrolled from 11:40 to midnight. Midnight access. East Wing. He had cleared the road for the stranger before Serena ever passed the card. So I set a trap, the only way I knew how, with an event. I drafted a fake alert into the scheduling system. A confidential review of the estate's full security architecture moved to the East Wing archive, Thursday at midnight, logged under my credentials. Then I made sure the draft sat visible exactly where a man with Falco's access would find it, and I told no one except Moretti. Moretti listened to my plan, swore once with feeling, and said, Rafael will have my head if this goes wrong. I said, then don't let it go wrong. If the traitor existed, he wouldn't be able to resist a midnight window into the very archive he'd been raiding, and Rafael, seeing a midnight entry under my name, would come running. That was the design. I needed him to see it. Thursday came wrapped in rain. The estate emptied on schedule, staff dismissed early for a fabricated systems upgrade, guards posted out of sight. I sat in the security office with Moretti, watching the East Wing feeds on a bank of monitors, my badge and my credentials glowing in the logs like a lantern in a dark window. Waiting is the part no one warns you about. I had planned 100-person galas without a flicker of nerves, but sitting in that dark office, listening to the building tick and settle, every minute stretched thin as wire. Moretti drank terrible coffee and cleaned his glasses twice. At 11:58 he said, without looking up, that whatever happened in the next hour, it had been a genuine privilege working with me. I discovered my hands were shaking and hid them under the desk. Midnight came and went. At 12:19, a door opened on screen 3. A figure moved through the archive approach with the unhurried confidence of a man walking through his own house. Keycard in hand, a slim drive in his pocket. Dominic Falco. 6 years of loyal service, walking into a trap built entirely out of his own habits. He went straight to the terminal, my terminal, the one with the clock 4 minutes fast, and plugged in the drive. On our screens, we watched him open the architecture files and begin copying them, calmly, professionally, a man finishing a job. Moretti gave the order. The east wing sealed itself around him like a held breath. Falco realized it 3 seconds too late. By the time he reached the door, the corridor lights had come on, and Moretti was standing at the end of it with 6 men and no expression at all. I was supposed to stay in the security office. I didn't. I was 2 corridors away when Rafael arrived, and I will never forget his face, because he had seen the midnight entry under my name, and come tearing through the rain expecting to pull me out of a fire. Instead, he found me standing in the corridor outside the archive, unhurt, unhurried, with the traitor already in custody, and the copied drive already tagged as evidence. He stopped dead. Rainwater ran off his coat. "You did this," he said. Not an accusation. Something closer to awe. "You told Moretti to find the truth before judging me," I said. "I just decided to hand it to him gift-wrapped." Rafael looked at me for a long moment, then at Falco, who would not meet anyone's eyes. What came out of Falco over the following days rewrote everything we thought we knew. It had never been about money. Serena had been placed in Rafael's path 8 months earlier by the Corsetti family, rivals who had spent years losing territory to him, and had finally chosen patience over war. The engagement was the operation. Serena was the door key, and Falco, whose gambling debts the Corsettis had quietly purchased 2 years earlier, was the hand that turned her. The stolen files, the guard rotations, the travel routes, the panic room locations, all of it fed a single plan. A hit on Rafael himself, timed for the autumn, designed to look like an accident on a road he traveled every week. Serena's fury at the lake hadn't been jealousy at all. It had been panic. A professional watching her 8 months of work wobble on the edge of exposure, because an event coordinator with honest eyes had turned a corner at the wrong moment. When Moretti laid the whole structure out, the room went quiet. It was elegant. It had been weeks from working, and it had collapsed because of a clock 4 minutes fast, and a woman who reads schedules for a living. Serena was arrested at her hotel 3 days later, along with 2 Corsetti intermediaries, on charges built from Falco's testimony, the keycard footage, and a trail of payments Moretti's people followed into the light. I saw her one last time, being led to a car in handcuffs, still beautiful, still composed. She looked at me across the hotel drive, and I expected hatred. What I saw instead was almost a shrug, one professional acknowledging another. The Corsetti organization, cut off at the knees and exposed to every rival watching, folded its ambitions within a month. Rafael's world exhaled. Her trial would take a year, but her story ended that day in the hotel drive. I learned later she had asked her lawyers for one thing before any deal: confirmation of whether Liana Hartley would be testifying. When they said yes, she stopped fighting the lesser charges. I think she understood, finally, that the woman she pushed into the lake was the one opponent she had never once planned for. Water has a way of revealing what was always underneath. Do you think I was right to set that trap alone? Or should I have told Rafael first? Tell me honestly in the comments, because I've asked myself that question more than once. The truth is, I didn't do it alone to be brave. I did it because it was the only way to prove, to him, to his people, and to myself, that I wasn't a liability to be managed. I was the person who had mapped their entire operation while they were busy underestimating the event staff. And Rafael understood exactly what I had proven. He told me so a week later, standing in the doorway of the security office where my timeline still covered the wall. "I've been protected my whole life," he said. "By money, by men, by fear. No one ever protected me with their mind." He looked at the wall, at the colored cards and the threads. "You don't need my guards, Liana. You never did. What you need is a seat at the table, and I'm done pretending otherwise." In the months between, he began quietly proving it. My title changed from event coordinator to director of estate operations. And then, as the legitimate businesses absorbed more of his attention, to something without precedent in that world. His counsel. I sat in meetings I would once have catered. I read contracts before he signed them. The old guard grumbled, right up until I caught a billing structure in a hotel deal that would have cost 7 figures. The grumbling stopped. I didn't fully understand what he meant that day. I understood it months later, on a cold, bright night in late autumn, when he asked me to walk with him, and led me, of all the places on his 100 guarded acres, down to the lake. The lake at night was unrecognizable from that June afternoon. No orchestra, no tents, no 300 staring faces. Just black water holding the moon, the boathouse a dark shape, the stones cold underfoot. He stopped at the exact spot where Serena had pushed me, and I realized he had chosen it deliberately. Rafael DeLuca did nothing accidentally. The last time you stood here, he said, you were at the mercy of my world. It pushed you in, and it watched you sink, and it did nothing. He turned to face me, and in his hand was a slim folder and a small dark box. This is a partnership contract, he said. Equal share of the legitimate empire, the hotels, the shipping, the vineyards. Your name next to mine, your authority equal to mine, not given, earned, and documented so no one can ever call it anything else. Then he opened the box. Inside was a ring, a single deep blue stone the color of the lake at night. And this, he said, his voice lower now, unguarded in a way I had heard only once before in the library, is me asking, not offering. Asking, because everything I am is safer with you standing beside me, and everything I feel stopped being professional a long time ago. The wind moved through the willows. I looked at the ring, at the contract, at this feared and lonely man who had watched me climb out of the water and had never once seen a victim. I thought about my mother, and the promise, and how every true thing I had ever said had led me, one honest step at a time, to this exact spot of ground. You realize, I said, that an equal partner gets to tell you when you're wrong. Every single time. For the second time in my life, I heard him laugh, really laugh, under an open sky. I've been counting on it, he said. I took his hand, the one without the box, and felt his fingers close around mine like an anchor. Then I guess she pushed the wrong woman into the water, I said. He slipped the ring onto my finger there at the edge of the lake, in the cold, clean air, and when he kissed me it tasted like autumn and certainty, and the dark water beside us held the moon perfectly still, as if even the lake had finally learned not to swallow me. We stood there a long time, his jacket around my shoulders, the one from the library, which I had never returned, and he had never asked for. Behind us, the estate lights glowed across the lawns where a garden party had once ended my old life. Ahead of us, the water lay calm and black and full of stars. If you were me, would you have taken his hand and the partnership? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe for more stories of women who refuse to stay down. I went into that lake as someone everyone overlooked. I came out of it as the woman the most dangerous man in the city chose as his equal. She pushed me in to silence me. All she did was teach me how to rise.